Take a look at that animal right there, that Brayford animal right here. And this is one of my bigger animals. I'd probably say he's he probably about 600 pounds. Somewhere around there, around 575, 600. But all of these animals, effectively the animals back here, the thing going on with these animals is that they're all effectively about the same weight. All right, they are about all the same weight. And I actually did that intentionally, right? When I was bringing home the animals, I was bringing home animals that were about the same weight as the rest of them, and they're all about the same weight, and so they'll all be just about going to the market at about the same time. If one or two of them need to be held back an extra month or two, I'll just leave them with the other animals. And so okay, this whole thing right now, this morning, what I'm gonna talk about. All right, and so I figured I would start off with this. I've always said that when it comes to money, okay, the whole thing about money is that money is not an opinion. All right, money's not an opinion. If you have a bunch of opinions and you have nothing to show for it, you're borderline a homeless person. I guarantee it. All right, it's borderline pathetic. All right, are you not even embarrassed? All right, are you not even ashamed of yourself? Why do you have so many opinions when you're borderline homeless? All right. And the whole thing about money is that money is not an opinion, all right? And when I talk about money, all right, the whole thing about it is that when I talk about money, I'm not bragging about it. It just is what it is, all right? I'm not bragging about it. I don't want your eyes rolling into the back of your head. All right, I don't, at the end of the day, it is what it is. If it comes down to it, I will just sit here and be rich by myself. Why would I care? All right, my financials are astronomical, and they're still going upwards, and they're going upwards very quickly. All right, at the end of the day, why would I care? All right, I don't know how else to put it other than it just is what it is. I am borderline, like I am actually looking to enter wealth territory within maybe the next 3 years. I am incredibly rich. All right, I effectively, and just to put things in perspective, from what I have seen, imagine living in the world where nothing costs anything. Right? I talk about the big idea of wealth is that everything costs nothing. Money's kind of an illusion. Once you hit a certain point with money, everything just kind of becomes an illusion. Right? I talk about this, the whole idea of wealth, right? The whole idea of making such a large amount of money is that when you hit a certain amount of money, effectively everything, it just becomes an illusion. Nothing costs anything. All right, that's the whole idea, that's the whole thing about it, right? That's like the big way for me to describe, and I used my farm as an example of this, right? To the poor person, you might take a look at this and you might go, oh my God, I can't do this because I don't have the money, right? But in all honesty, the money doesn't matter, right? If I had $5,000, what would I do with that $5,000, right? I would go and buy 5 cattle. I would buy a half a tonnage of fertilizer. I would buy a tonnage of fertilizer. I would, get all the animals, their medication, and then I would leverage against my $5 grand, right? I would go to the bank and take another $5 grand, buy another 5 cattle, buy another half a tonnage of fertilizer, right? That's how I would do it. And if I have 10 animals and I owe the bank 5 and I sell my 10 animals and I make enough money to buy 20 and I sell and I pay the bank back their 5 animals, right? And I have 15 animals worth of money left. How much leverage do I take then? 30, right? That's how I would do it. And in all honesty, and I've even spoken about this, right? Once you become poor, you're gonna die poor. I guarantee it. It doesn't matter what your reason for being poor is. All right, you're gonna die poor. All right, have fun with that. All right, it's borderline. And in all reality, it's actually kind of sad. I don't know how you ended up being, effectively that pathetic. All right, how does that even happen? If you're born average, you have the capacity to learn how to do anything, and you learn how to become a full-blown idiot. How does that even happen? All right, you can make it to the 10% mark, and the whole idea of the 10% mark is if you do 10%, what happens with your assets? Let's say you put money into an asset. What happens when you are at the 10% mark? You get all of your money back. That's it. If you put $5,000 into your cattle business and you make $5,000 back, then congratulations, you are at the 10% mark. At that point, you can practice for free. What does it matter, right? What does it matter? Right? And when I talk to you about this, when I talk about money, when I speak about my financial situation, you have to understand that I'm not bragging about it. I figured that the only way to really, to really get this idea across, and maybe, and I use the idea of the candle, right? If you have a candle, you can light other candles with it. And for me to, present this information in a way that, because I've always said, if I'm the only one that makes it, and just to put things in, if I am the only one that makes it, it kind of makes it not worth anything. All right, I do have the capacity to enrich myself all the time, effectively. Even if I lost everything, I could redo it all in 30 seconds. But at the end of the day, in the universal, scheme of things, it doesn't mean anything. All right, and at the end of the day, if you legitimately decide that you are going to make it, and you have chosen to make it, then I am here to encourage you to do so. All right, because as far as I know, I don't even know anybody even doing 10%. I don't know anybody doing 10%, all right? I don't know anybody doing 10%. And so the whole thing about it, okay, when I talk about money, and I'm just gonna be okay, and when I talk about this whole thing, I'm just, I'm not doing this to be a malicious person. I'm not doing this to brag. I'm just saying it is what it is, and I'm giving you the best information that I have. And at the end of the day, right, freedom of speech, I should be allowed to, I am allowed to, under constitutional protection, I am allowed to speak about things. And at the end of the day, I am just being honest about it. All right, so how, just to put things in perspective, if I legitimately only did 25%, and this is also what I mean by I don't go around and help people, because a lot of people don't want help. A lot of people want to be saved. And when they see the amount of money that I make, it borderline turns them into a desperate moron, right? Because the amount of money that I make is drastic. You have to understand that in terms of what I do, we're effectively talking about a 0.0000001% success rate. And here's another way to look at it. If I only did half of what I was doing, if I legitimately intentionally reduced myself to half, I would still make about $200,000 to $250,000 a year of take-home pay. And just to put things in perspective, and think about it like this, or I mean, you could think about it however which way you want. I will give you a very realistic situation of what money looks like to me. If I had $5,000 and I went to the bank and I took a loan for another $5,000, so I had $10,000, and with that $10,000, I was able to go and I was able to buy 10 cattle, and I was able to buy 1.5 tonnages of fertilizer, and I was able to buy all the medication, and I was able to buy whatever, the gasoline for my truck, right? How long do you think it would take for me to double that 10 grand? Maybe 6 months, maybe. All right, so now I have 20 grand, right? Now I have 20 grand. And this is what money looks like to me, all right? I am telling you that this is what money looks like to me. All right, it just is what it is. And even these animals, when I liquidate these animals, I am reasonably anticipating that I have enough money to grow my balance sheet by more than 50%. I will legitimately be more than doubling my income between now and the end of the year. And that would be from me just reinvesting my earnings. This is what money looks like to me. If I had $5,000 and I went to the bank and I took a loan for another $5,000, so I had $10,000, and I took this 10 grand, and what I did with it was I bought 10 cattle, and I bought 1.5 tonnages of fertilizer, and then I also went and bought the antibiotics or whatever medication it is that I needed, and I bought some gasoline, right? And within 6 months, I was able to, I would be turning that $10,000 into about $20,000 by me doing what I do, right? I raise commercial animals, right? When I buy animals, I buy commercially viable animals, and I raise these animals to a commercial standard, all right? I raise these animals to a commercial standard, and by the time I get done, I effectively have doubled my money, maybe a little bit more. Maybe a little bit more. It might be, it might honestly be 22,000. It might be 22,000. All right, 2.2 times. And so if I have 22 grand and I owe the bank 5 grand and I have 17 grand left, I would at that point, I would go and take a loan for 17 grand, right? I wouldn't take a loan for 5 grand. And if I did that 2 times in a year, in 1 year, if I did that 2 times, how much money do you think I would end up with? Right? I mean, just sit there and think. It would be like $128,000. All right, that is what money looks like for me. All right, if I had, and I was saying that if I had 5 grand, I could turn that 5 grand into 100 grand in 2 years, and I could do it very rapidly. I could probably do it in less than a year. That's what money looks like for me. Even these animals, when I liquidate these animals, I will probably make enough money. I would reasonably anticipate that I make enough money to grow my balance sheet by somewhere between 50 and 75%. I'm able to buy 2 loads of grain. All right, and everything else, the antibiotics and everything else. That's what money looks like for me. Even and here's the thing. Do you think I would have, when you look at me and you take a look at, I've always, when you take a look at me farming, when you take a look at me running cattle, do you think I would have problems running 50 or 60 cattle a year? Do you legitimately think I would have an issue running 50 or 60 cattle a year? That would be borderline like me scraping my, like me dragging my feet. If I only ran 50 or 60 cattle a year, that would be borderline pathetic for me. Borderline pathetic. I would intentionally have to do worse to only do that. If I legitimately only ran 60 cattle for the year, 55 cattle for the year, that would be about 130 grand. All right, and if I only ran 50 or 60 cattle a year, that would, for me, that would be borderline pathetic. All right, I'll probably end up running somewhere around 250, maybe even up to 400 cattle by the end of this year. I'm already at 90. All right, but that's what money looks like for me. All right, and I'm just giving you the truth. All right, I am telling you about it is what it is when it comes to farming. And I talk about this all the time. The whole thing about me when I farm is that I actually made my money farming, and the amount of money that I make farming is absolutely ballistic. All right, I actually managed to make more money than everybody on the entire planet doing just about anything, and it was by a lot. I make such a massive amount of money farming. It's borderline it's borderline it's borderline like phenomenal. Like, I do better than the commercial standard by myself. All right, and it is what it is, but that's another way to look at it. That's what money looks like for me. Even if I only had 5 grand. If I had $5,000, what could I do with that $5,000? What would I do with that $5,000? Well, I would go to the bank and I would take a loan for another 5 grand. All right, and then I would go and buy 10 animals. I'd buy 1.5 tons of fertilizer. All right, I'd buy the medications and I'd buy the gasoline or whatever else it is that I needed. And then, in all honesty, within 6 months, right? Within 6 months, I would have more than doubled the money. All right, because the animals within 6 months, if I bring them home at 250, they'll be about 750, 800. All right. And, congratulations. All right. That's what I would do. And if I did that 2 times in 1 year, how much money would I end up with at the end of the year? It would be over 100 grand. All right. And, and at the end of the day, that's what my results look like. That's what money looks like for me. When you're watching me farm, you have to understand that I effectively did so well at it that I effectively took a dump on the entire planet. Legitimately. All right, and at the end of the day, it doesn't matter to me. All right, trust me, it doesn't matter to me. You have to understand that at the end of the day, I actually did it, and I actually put in the work to make it. All right, I actually put in the work to make it. I actually made it. This is not my opinion. I'm not giving you my opinions, right? Nobody cares about your opinion. Chances are, if you have a bunch of opinions and you have nothing to show for it, you're actually closer to being homeless than you are anything else. And you're going to die like that. I guarantee it. All right, you're never going to make it out. If you made it out of that, it would be a miracle. I guarantee it. It doesn't matter why you're poor. I fell out of heaven to 7 and my life's a magical journey. Congratulations, die poor. All right, it doesn't matter what your reason for being poor is. At the end of the day, money is not an opinion, right? Money's not an opinion. Then, let's talk about money. right? Let's talk about money. How much money, how much money are we talking about? All right, me, when I talk about this, I just flat out say it, right? When I liquidate my animals and I just take the money that I make, I've had these animals on grass for 8-9 months out of the year. I had an incredibly good crop of grass last year. And, when I liquidate these animals, I will probably make enough money to grow my balance sheet by 50 to 75% just by taking the money that I make from this business and putting it back into my business. I probably will. All right, I probably will. And so, let's talk about money. All right, let's talk about, something relevant other than in a delusional fantasy. Or I fell out of heaven a 7. No, you didn't fall out of heaven a 7. You fell out of heaven average, and then you went downhill your entire life, and now you're some pathetic gremlin. All right, it's borderline pathetic. And you don't want to end up in a situation where you end up pathetic. All right, you don't want to end up in a situation where you're practically good for nothing. And you don't want to end up like that. If you end up like that, your life will legitimately be miserable forever. All right, and then you'll probably end up encouraging other people to be miserable forever too. And you've now perpetuated the poorness death loop. All right, actually go out and and do something, right? And actually go out and be able to do something, right? Like if you put me on a field with nothing but $5,000, I could turn that $5,000 into $100,000 very quickly. Even right now, when you're taking a look at my farm right now, and just to put things in perspective, if we're going to take a look at my balance sheet right now, I will probably make $100,000 in the next 3 months. In just the next 3 months, I will, next 3 to 4 months, I will make about $100,000. It's not going to take me a year, right? I have more cattle, right? It maybe takes me 3-4 months to make $100,000, and for me to make my next $100,000, granted that I find a reasonable opportunity to expand my business, right? Like I find myself a 200 acre field or something, 300 acre field. Granted that I find a way to reasonably expand my business, for me to make my next $100,000, it won't take me 3 or 4 months. It will take me less time than that. All right, it will take me less time than I am actually compounding my earnings. All right, my revenue is actually compounding upwards. All right, and I've talked about this. The whole thing about it is like when I show you what it is that I got going on, my business is actually growing. My business is growing. I would reasonably anticipate that when I liquidate these animals, I will generate enough money from just liquidating the animals to grow my balance sheet by more than 50%. That's what you're looking at, right? And at the end of the day, it is what it is, all right? And I've talked about the whole idea of money. The whole idea of money is that the dollar that I make is the same dollar that anybody else makes. If you want to know what it was like to start yourself a cattle farm on a 10.5 acre field and make $350,000 a year, $500,000 a year, if you want to know what that was like, then let's see it. Because nobody cares about an opinion. Why do you have so many opinions? You're practically a bum. I guarantee it. Right, let's see it. I would be willing to bet that if I took this bet with the entire planet, you're not even going to make it to the 10% mark. That's the bet I would take. All right, and it's borderline pathetic. All right, if you are average, you can make it to the 10% mark. How are you not even getting to the 10% mark? That's borderline pitiful. All right, you can make it to the 10% mark. When you're watching me farm, you need to understand that when I farm, I effectively do it so well that I legitimately make more money than anybody on the entire planet doing anything. And the whole idea about, why do I not go around and help people, right? The reason that I don't help people is because a lot of people are not asking to be helped. A lot of people are in a desperately horrible situation, and they're what I call flailing in the ocean. All right, they're asking to be saved. A lot of people are asking to be saved. And you have to understand that when I make money, even if I only put in 50% of the effort, I would still make $200,000 a year. Only 50%. If I only had $5,000, I could turn that $5,000 into more than $100,000 in less than a year. And I would do it with a guarantee. That's how I make money. That's the amount of money that I make when I farm. Right? That's also, and you have to understand that money, if you legitimately think that money will help you, let me take that back. Let me redact that. If you legitimately think that money is the solution to your problems, you only think like that because you're an idiot and you're poor. Money doesn't really even do anything. Money is kind of an illusion. At the end of the day, and I've talked about this in terms of farming, if you legitimately think that you need money to become a farmer, you only think like that because you're poor and you're an idiot. Do you even know how to farm? Like, ask yourself that, because if you don't know how to farm, then the money won't do anything. And farming is one of the hardest things that you could ever learn. It took me 15 years, and I legitimately lived where I worked, and I worked on this thing every single day. Farming is not some easy thing. All right, do you even know how to farm? At all, and do you know how to do any of it? Like, do you even know what a beef animal is? Do you even know how to grow grass? Do you know how to do any of it at all? And if your answer is, if the answer is I fell out of heaven at 7 and I'm going to go on a magical journey, you're going to die poor. You're never going to make it. You're not even going to do 10% your entire life. I guarantee it. I would be willing to take that bet 10-1. All right, and when you're watching me farm, right, and I've always said money is not an opinion. Money is not an opinion. I just flat out, and when I talk about money, I just tell you it is what it is. I'm not bragging about it. I actually made it. I legitimately generate enough money to where I don't worry about money anymore. I don't. Even when you're looking at what I'm doing right now, when you're taking a look at my farm, you have to understand that this farm right here, when I liquidate my assets in the next 3 or 4 months, I will more than likely generate enough money. I would reasonably anticipate that I generate enough money to grow my business by more than somewhere between 50 and 75%. I will probably end up making about $100,000 in the next 3 or 4 months. That's how much money I make. That's what money looks like to me. All right, I'm not bragging about it. It just is what it is. Because at the end of the day, I actually did it, right? I actually put in the effort. I actually put in the time, and I actually did it. This is not my opinion, all right? I actually made it. I legitimately managed to make so much money farming that I effectively started making more money than anybody on the entire planet doing just about anything, and it's by a lot. Right? I'm not lying about it. I am legitimately telling you the truth. And a very realistic way to take a look at this is imagine what I would do think about what I would do with $5,000. And then think about how much money I would generate in just that first year. Think about how much money I would make in that first year. If I had $5,000 and I took a loan for $5,000 more from the bank, that would put me at $10,000, right? And if I took that $10,000 and I went to the sale barn and I purchased commodity animals at a commodity price, right? I talk about the commodity animal and the commodity price. If I purchased commodity type animals at a commodity price, right? And I just went and I purchased 10 animals and I purchased a tonnage and a half of fertilizer, right? And then I just raised those animals for 6 months and I took them from 250 pounds to 750 pounds to 800 pounds. And then I took them back to market, right? I would just about more than double my money, right? And if I did that 2 times in a year, how much money would I end up with, right? This is not some debatable thing, right? It would be well, I guess technically it would take me, 1 year and 3 months. It would be like $68,000. I would be able to turn that $5,000 into $68,000 in just the first year, right? And then I would pay the bank back their $20,000, right? And so effectively, I would have about 50. I would be able to tenfold the money in 1 year, right? I would pay the bank back their $15,000. But in all honesty, right, I would not do that. Why? right? Because I would just pay the interest on the loan and take a loan for more money, simply because if my balance sheet is growing, I would leverage against my assets, right? I would leverage against my assets. I'm not saying that you should just take a loan for money and buy cattle. I'm not saying that. But if my balance sheet was growing, right, if I started off with 5 animals and I owed the bank 5 animals and I had 10 animals and I grew those 10 animals and I made enough money to buy 20 and I paid the bank back their 5 animals, I had enough money, I would have enough money to pay the bank back their 5 animals. That would still leave me with enough money to buy 15 animals, right? So I would take a loan for 10 more. Right, I would take more loans, right? And I am not encouraging anybody to go and leverage themselves. I'm not encouraging you to leverage yourself to the eyeballs. I'm just saying that is how I run my balance sheet. And I always invest my capital first. If I go to the sell barn and I sell 10 animals and I make enough money to buy 20 and I pay the bank and I have 5 animals worth of a loan, that leaves me with 15 animals worth of my own money. I would invest my 15 animals worth of money first before I started, investing the bank's money. All right, I would invest my 15 animals worth of money first. And when I invest my 15 animals worth of capital, if anything looks like it is going horribly wrong, for me to legitimately lose money at that point, I would have to lose 100% of my animals. Am I going to lose 100% of my animals? Absolutely not. That does not happen, right? For me to legitimately start losing money, I would have to lose 100% of my animals, which will not happen. That has not happened and it won't happen. All right, but for me to legitimately start losing money, this is how you stay away from bankruptcy and grow your business at the same time. All right, this is how I did it. And when I did it, you have to understand that when I do this stuff, my results, what you're looking at effectively, it's like it's borderline a 0 percentile. It's almost unheard of. And as far as I know, I'm the only one that's actually done it. I don't know anybody, and just to put things in perspective, when you take a look at the numbers, right, I've always said that the money is the money, it doesn't matter. When you take a look at what I'm doing and you just, you understand that I make about, if I do very poorly, maybe I make, about $350 a year. Making $350,000 a year on a 10.5 acre field running commercial cattle is unheard of. Most people can't even do 35,000. Most people can't even do 35 grand. Not even 10%. Most people can't even make any money at all farming. All right, a lot of people lose money farming. And I'm sitting here on a 10.5 acre field by myself, and I would reasonably anticipate that in the next 3 or 4 months, I make over $100,000. I would be willing to bet. All right, I will make over $100,000 in the next 3 or 4 months. That's, it is what it is. The money is the money. All right, and at the end of the day, it just is what it is. I mean, if you're average, you have you have to understand that you can do 10%. If you cannot do 10%, it is borderline pathetic. I guarantee it. I mean, you're effectively not going to get anywhere your entire life. I would be willing to bet money, and I'm not saying that to be a malicious person. At the end of the day, what does it matter to me? All right, and if anything, it's kind of sad. It's borderline sad. All right, because it's like you legitimately had the capacity to learn how to do anything, and you learned how to become an idiot. How is that even possible? I don't know. Like, I don't, and at the end of the day, I'm not saying this to be a malicious person. I've already said that the whole thing about me is that I don't go around save people. I don't go around saving people, all right? At the end of the day, you can't be saved. Most people can't. You're just effectively just gonna die worthless you're gonna live your whole life worthless, and then you'll die with your whatever, right? And it doesn't matter. All right, I mean, it does matter. I'm not gonna say it doesn't matter. It does matter. All right, it's borderline, it's borderline sad, and it's also kind of pathetic. At the end of the day, but at the end of the day, it is what it is. I mean, I'm not gonna go and become poor. I'm not going to be poor, right? Why would I choose to be poor? I legitimately generate enough money, and my financials are still going upwards, and they are going upwards very quickly. They are still going upwards very quickly. I would actually anticipate that by the end of the year, my income more than doubles. All right, that's what I reasonably anticipate. My income is still going up very quickly, all right? I do very well for myself. All right, and as far as I know, I don't even know anybody even doing 10%. All right, talk is cheap. Let's see it. How many cattle do you run a year? Let's see it. How much money did you bring home? Let's see it. All right, let's talk about money. And when I talk about money, and I thought about this morning, I'm just going to go ahead and I'm just going to talk about it because at the end of the day, right, I have a constitutional right to speak about the ideas of my life. All right, I understand that and when I talk about this, which at the end of the day, I don't care if every single one of you drop dead. It wouldn't matter to me. It doesn't matter to me. All right, at the end of the day, the average person is not a saint. All right, chances are you're not some incredible person. All right, and me, I'm not a saint, right? I'm not a saint. I'm not a saint. All right, and that's also my whole thing. But I don't save people. All right, at the end of the day, I present my information. I give you my information. And, if you want to do with it what you want to do with it, then you can do with it what you want to do with it. At the end of the day, I mean, if you're poor, you're probably going to hold on to being poor for the rest of your life. Nobody cares. All right, have fun dying poor. All right. When, when you're 70 and you have nothing and you're sitting there, twiddling your thumbs. Right. Have fun with that. In terms of it just is what it is. My income is actually going upwards very quickly. All right. If you want to live your whole life scraping out the bottom of the barrel for everything, legitimately having barely anything your entire life, if that's how you want to live your life, it doesn't, then go ahead and do it. All right. It doesn't, I don't, I'm not going to save you from that. It doesn't matter to me. All right, whatever, right? If that's legitimately how you've decided that you wanted to live, then, I hope that you've made your peace with God about it. Because if it turns you into a resentful moron, if it turns you into I fell out of heaven at 7 and you start dancing with the devil and you start selling your soul to the devil for nothing, then, that's you chose to do that. Remember that. I've always said that if you choose to do something, then you have to remember that you chose to do it. Right, if that's legitimately what you chose to do, then that's what you chose to do. So don't turn into a resentful moron about it. Don't turn into I fell out of heaven at 7 and my life's a magical journey about it. Right, I understand that you chose to be poor. Right, you chose to do that to yourself, and and be okay with it. If you don't want to be poor. Right, if you legitimately want to go out and you want to, you're going to go and you're going to make yourself some money, how do I suggest that you do it? Find an asset that you understand. All right, you should probably find yourself an accountant that specifically understands your asset. Talk to your accountant about the asset. Right, and start, and find, and make a good deal on this asset, and et cetera, et cetera. All right, start learning how to do something, actually learn how to, find somebody that actually, talk, whatever. Find a rich person and ask him about it. I'm not saying ask me about it. Don't ask me about it. I already give away all of my information for free. All right, don't ask me about it. I don't care if you died. All right, I give away all of my information for free. All right, and but that's effectively what you're looking at. When it comes to farming, you have to understand that I effectively may be the best in the world at it. I may be one of the best in the world at it by a long shot. Like if you put me on a field with everybody on the entire planet, I would effectively just eat everybody alive. I would be willing to bet. It wouldn't even be close. And just to put things in perspective, if I had $5 grand, I could turn that $5 grand into $100 grand very quickly. I have my $5 grand. I take a loan for $5 more grand. I have $10 grand. With that $10 grand, I can buy 10 cattle, and I can buy a tonnage and a half of fertilizer. I can buy all the antibiotics, and I can buy whatever else it is that I need. And when I sell these 10 animals, if the commodity markets go sideways in 6 months, when I sell these 10 animals, I will probably have enough money to buy 20. Or I will probably have enough money to buy 20 or 22 animals. All right, and if I did that for a year and a half, that would turn into over 100 grand very quickly. It would turn into like 150 grand very quickly. 200 grand very fast. That's effectively what money looks like for me. That's what money looks like for me. That's a very honest way to look at it. I legitimately ended up generating. I legitimately generate such a large amount of money farming that effectively everything. And just to put things in perspective, the most realistic way for me to put this is that nothing costs anything to me. Nothing costs anything. When you take a look at what I'm doing, none of this costs me anything. All of this makes me money. Nothing costs anything. That's like the most realistic way for me to describe the amount of money that I make. Nothing costs me anything. All of this makes me money. All of it does, and it makes me a drastic sum of money. I would reasonably anticipate that I make about $100,000 in the next 3 or 4 months. This cattle business will make me about $100,000 in the next 3 or 4 months. It's not going to cost me anything. That's the most, realistic way for me to put it. And, right, I've always said that the big idea with this is that my income is actually going upwards very quickly. I believe that I will enter wealth territory within the next three, maybe 5 years. That, right now I may be extremely rich. But I will enter wealth territory in the next 3 to 5 years. That is what I reasonably believe. Like, I could legitimately walk off into the sunset for the rest of my life and never worry about anything. And, forever type of money. Like, buy myself 10 Ferraris and it won't matter type money. Legitimately, I believe that I will enter wealth territory in about the next 3 or 5 years. What am I doing as a rich person, right? I am effectively extremely rich. And what am I doing with my money right now? I am growing my business with it. That's all I'm doing. I'm not going on any magical journeys. I'm not buying it. I'm not, oh my God, now's my chance to go and be an idiot. I'm not doing anything like that. I am legitimately just taking my money and putting it back into my business. And I have realistic strategies for how I am doing that. Leveraging against my earnings, commodity assets, the business plan. I have a reasonable way for how I'm doing all of it. But that is what I am doing. I would say that I am extremely rich. And what am I doing with the money that I believe will put me in a situation where I enter wealth territory in the next 3 to 5 years? I am reinvesting the money back into my business. I am doing that at a rate of about 150% of what I make. I actually invest about 150% of the money that I make back into my business. And I believe that within the next 3 to 5 years, I will enter wealth territory. That's what I see. As of right now, I am already extremely rich. I don't worry about none of this costs me anything. All of this makes me money. I would reasonably anticipate that I make about $100,000 on this cattle business in the next 3 or 4 months. All right.